Have you ever wondered how one man's ambition could change the entire course of history? How a single leader could rise from a small island and shake the thrones of kings and emperors across Europe? Today, we'll explore a story filled with battles, dreams, victories, and defeats, a story of power, hope, and lessons that still speak to us even after 2 centuries. After the turbulence of the French Revolution, France was left in political chaos. The monarchy had been overthrown, and many leaders had come and gone, leaving the nation uncertain and unstable. In this environment, a man named Napoleon Bonaparte began to rise in influence. He was a military officer known for his sharp mind and remarkable successes in battle. People admired his leadership, and many believed he could bring order back. To the contrary, in 1799, Napoleon took control of the government through a coup, becoming the first consul of France. This marked the beginning of his political rule. Though France was still called a republic, it became clear that Napoleon held the real power. In 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French, signaling a new era where he would rule with authority over the nation. His ambition wasn't just limited to France. He wanted to expand France's territory and influence throughout Europe. He believed in spreading revolutionary ideals such as legal equality and abolishing old feudal practices. But he also sought personal glory and dominance. His rise to power was marked by both political skill and military achievements, as he reorganized the government, stabilized the economy, and created a more efficient legal system known later as the Napoleonic Code. People saw him as a symbol of strong leadership. After the years of disorder that followed the revolution, his rule promised strength and stability, and many in France supported him as he set out to reshape Europe under his vision. His leadership style was a mix of strict control, military brilliance, and the use of propaganda to win the support of the people. Napoleon's rise laid the foundation for the long years of war that would soon follow. With France at the center of a great struggle for power, during the Napoleonic Wars, several major battles shaped the course of history and determined the fate of Europe. One of the most famous was the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, often called the Battle of the Three Emperors. In this battle, Napoleon faced the combined armies of Russia and Austria. Using clever tactics, he lured his enemies into a trap by pretending to have a weak position. When the opposing forces attacked, Napoleon's army struck back with precise timing and overwhelming force. The result was a decisive victory for France, with thousands of enemy soldiers captured or killed. This battle is often seen as Napoleon's greatest military triumph and strengthened his control over Europe. In the same year, however, Napoleon faced a serious defeat at sea during the Battle of Trafalgar. The British Navy, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, confronted the combined French and Spanish fleets near the coast of Spain. Despite being outnumbered, the British used superior tactics to break the enemy line and destroy their ships. The British victory at Trafalgar secured control of the seas for Britain and made it impossible for Napoleon to invade the British Isles. This loss forced Napoleon to shift his strategy to focus on the continent rather than naval power. Later, in 1815, the Battle of Waterloo marked the final chapter of Napoleon's military career. After escaping exile and regaining power for a brief period known as the 100 Days, Napoleon led his army into Belgium. There, he faced the British-led forces under the Duke of Wellington, along with the Prussian army. The fighting was intense and brutal, but Napoleon's forces were ultimately defeated. This defeat ended his rule permanently and led to his second exile, this time to the remote island of St. Helena, far from Europe. Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812 is considered one of the most disastrous military campaigns in history. Napoleon believed that Russia was secretly trading with Britain, defying his continental system, and he wanted to punish them while also expanding his power further east. Confident in his previous victories, he gathered an enormous army known as the Grande Armée, consisting of soldiers from many European countries under his control. In June 1812, Napoleon led this vast force into Russia, expecting a quick and decisive victory. However, the The Russian military avoided direct large battles early on. Instead, they kept retreating deeper into their own territory, drawing the French army farther away from their supply lines. As the French advanced, the Russians burned crops, villages, and cities in a tactic known as scorched earth, leaving nothing for the invaders to use. The French army suffered from hunger, disease, and exhaustion as they moved deeper into the harsh landscape. In September, Napoleon reached Moscow, but the city was set on fire by the Russians and abandoned. There was nothing to gain from capturing it, and the bitter Russian winter began to set in. Without shelter, supplies, or proper clothing, Napoleon's soldiers faced freezing temperatures, starvation, and constant attacks from Russian forces. The retreat from Moscow became a nightmare, with thousands of soldiers dying every day from cold, hunger, and enemy raids. Horses collapsed in the snow, weapons were abandoned, and the once great army fell into chaos. Of the more than 600,000 men who began the campaign, only a small fraction survived the journey back to France. Napoleon's failure in Russia shattered his image of invincibility and encouraged other European nations to rise against him, leading to the beginning of his decline and the collapse of his empire in the following years. After the disastrous defeat in Russia, Napoleon's control over Europe began to weaken. One by one, former allies and subject nations turned against him. In 1814, a coalition of European powers, including Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, invaded France itself. Napoleon fought fiercely, but could not stop their advance. Eventually, Paris was captured, and he was forced to abdicate the throne. The victors decided to exile him to the small island of Elba in the Mediterranean Sea. Though he was allowed to keep the title of emperor, his rule was now limited to this tiny island. However, Napoleon was not ready to accept defeat. In early 1815, he escaped from Elba and returned to France. When he landed on the French coast, soldiers were sent to arrest him, but instead of capturing him, they joined him, cheering him as their leader once more. As he marched toward Paris, more and more supporters gathered around him. Soon, Napoleon regained full control of France, and this short period of his return to power became known as the 100 Days. During these days, Napoleon tried to rebuild his army and restore his position in Europe. However, the other European nations quickly declared war on him again. Determined not to let him threaten the peace they had restored, Napoleon led his forces into Belgium to strike before his enemies could fully unite. There, he faced the armies of Britain, led by the Duke of Wellington, and Prussia, under General Blucher. The crucial battle took place near the village of Waterloo. Despite his efforts, Napoleon's forces were unable to defeat the combined strength of his enemies. After a long and brutal fight, his army was crushed, bringing an end to his rule. Once and for all, he was captured and exiled again, this time to the distant island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean. Even though Napoleon's reign ended with his defeat at Waterloo, his legacy continued to shape Europe and the world for many years. One of his most important contributions was the Napoleonic Code, a set of civil laws that simplified and modernized legal systems. It promoted ideas like equality before the law, protection of property rights, and freedom of religion, which inspired legal reforms in many other countries. The code became a foundation for many legal systems in Europe and beyond, showing that even after war, ideas can last much longer than battles. Napoleon also changed the political map of Europe. During his conquests, he dissolved old feudal structures and reorganized many regions. Countries like Germany and Italy, which had been divided into many small states, began to experience a stronger sense of unity. Though Napoleon's empire fell, the seeds of nationalism and the desire for unification grew stronger in these places, eventually leading to major changes later in the 19th century. His wars also weakened the traditional monarchies and led to the spread of revolutionary ideas that questioned royal authority. Many people began to believe in the power of citizenship, personal rights, and political representation. Napoleon's influence even reached military strategy and organization. His methods of warfare, including mass conscription and fast, flexible troop movements, were studied by generals for generations. He showed how leadership and planning could turn even a weak position into victory, though his ambition also served as a warning of the dangers of overreaching power. In exile on St. Helena, Napoleon spent his final years reflecting on his life and actions, leaving behind many writings. While some remember him as a tyrant and warmonger, others see him as a reformer and visionary who reshaped Europe in ways that still echo through history today. The story of the Napoleonic Wars is not just about battles, empires, or great victories and defeats. It is a story of ambition, of dreams both rising and falling, and of how one man's choices affected millions of lives across Europe and beyond. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power brought great change, both through war and through ideas that shaped the future. His victories showed the strength of determination and strategy, while his defeats revealed the limits of power and the cost of overreaching ambition. From the fields of Austerlitz to the cold roads of Russia, from the shores of Elba to the final stand at Waterloo, his journey reminds us that history is shaped by both courage and caution, by brilliance and by mistakes. Even long after his time ended, his influence remained through legal reforms, ideas of equality, and movements for national unity. His story teaches that leadership carries great responsibility and that the choices of a single person can leave a lasting mark on the world, for better or for worse.